This is the minor side of life. And now, Rob Sternberg.
Thank you, Pete, and we're so glad you're with us here on the minor side of life. This is where we talk candidly about the business and promotional aspects of minor league sports. Each episode, you'll hear from a different guest who's either worked in a minor league office or played or performed on the minor league stage. We talk about how they got started, what they've learned, and some opinions and personal stories along the way. If you've worked in minor league sports or want to know what it's like, then this is the show for you. For me, from the Texas League and the Eastern League to the PCL and now the International League, I'll bring almost a decade of minor league baseball stories and experience to the table, and very much looking forward to sharing them with you. We've got a lot of exciting content coming up here on the minor side that we'll get into toward the end of the episode here, so please make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show pages. They're at The Minor Side on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and wherever you are listening to this podcast. And especially if you're listening to this as it is originally released, we thank you so much for your support. The minor league baseball offseason is here. The ideas are flowing right now. Make sure to get your promo item lists over to Dustin at promotionaladventures.com. They're the presenting sponsor of this episode, and you will be in good hands there, and we'll get to Dustin and his team at Promotional Adventures a little later on in this episode. This show is also part of a two-part release, along with an episode where I talk with Connor Gates. Connor is the first guest on the minor side who I actually used to work side by side with. He was about 10 years old, not when I was working he was 10 years old and I was working with him. No, Connor was 10 years old when the Binghamton Mets became the Binghamton Mets in Binghamton when they first showed up in town. And all he ever wanted to do was work for them. He did by starting out as a bat boy. He was a clubby, and eventually he moved on to the front office, where he took his theater background to probably uncharted waters in minor league baseball. But damn, there is some chemistry between theater and minor league baseball. And there he was like he fit like an old glove, I'd say. He was running their community relations and on-field promotions and theme nights. It was his dream to work in baseball, and unfortunately it came to a crashing halt a few years ago. But since then, Connor has found himself back in sports, and we'll talk with him about it all. Again, it's available right now wherever you listen to podcasts and over at minorside.com. In this episode, though, there is no guest, so it's just you and me. And I'll talk about how I got started in minor league baseball. Not that it's a terrifying proposition, but I figured at least early on in the minor side, I would do an episode like this. And I think it works well pairing the conversation with Connor that I had. And we'll give you some context to where I'm coming from. And I'll go over where I've been, what I've done, who I've pissed off, how I almost didn't last, and then why we're doing this show here at all. Again, from the top, my name is Rob Sternberg, and I just completed my 9th season. Oh, sounds like a sobriety deal here. My name is Rob Sternberg, and I just completed my 9th season in minor league baseball. It's a fact. I've worn many hats for what's turned into many clubs. My stops have included Northwest Arkansas, Binghamton, New York, Omaha, Nebraska, to right here in the Lehigh Valley, handling our team's creative services and production. And I'll tell you all about it as we go for sure. For this episode, we'll take it right up to Binghamton about then. To start, what am I doing and why am I doing this? We wrote a little bit about this in the About the Show over at minorside.com, but more or less I'll use what I'm about to say as somewhat of an elevator pitch if we're going to start using dicky little terms, and sometimes we have to. But the truth is, it is the truth, and so here goes. I grew up wanting to work in sports, and if I couldn't work in sports, I wanted to work in professional wrestling. But I'm talking about professional wrestling, not that amateur punk stuff. I'm talking about the blood and the guts, the glitz and the glamour, if you will. Some have got wrestling references already, not only in this deal, but in previous episodes. We'll try not to beat you over the head with them too much. But of course, the truth is that I don't do either, baseball or wrestling. I'm not a scout. I'm not a player development person. I'm not a fucking shortstop. And I'm not going to be at WrestleMania either. But as I look back, it's amazing because what I actually feel like I do is a combination of both. In minor league baseball, 99 times out of 100, we're not selling baseball. And that's where I come in. It's where a lot of us come in. And the number of roles that I've had is really to dress everything else up in the ballpark, whether it's the graphics and videos you see, the fireworks, the incessant sound effects you hear. And anyone who's worked with a game with me knows that they can be incessant, but that's bullshit. And I'll get to that at some point as well. But whether it's the giveaway items, the promotions, the food, whatever's inside the ballpark that's not the actual game itself, that's really where I come in. And of course, that's where we come in as an industry. So of course, we're not selling the baseball, even though the actual games are real, sort of. They're sort of real. They're not always real. And maybe we could talk about that as well. But really, that's the baseball part. And just like the flip side on the professional wrestling aspect, it's not real, sort of. And so they're really just selling all the trimmings and all the glitz around what would be a real contest. So there's really a lot of similarities there. And of course, I love the adage, and we hear it all the time about when the fans leave the game, it's not important that they remember the score so much that it is important that they know they had a good time. Well, the first time I heard that was the first time I was at the PBEO Job Fair in Vegas, and this was in 2008. It was said by Pat O'Connor, a minor league baseball president, of course. And the other deal I distinctly remember him saying as I was sitting there in the audience, probably half hungover, to be honest, was that he was not here to make us rich. And that was also damn true. I told him about this last year, actually, and he basically joked that he was curious. Did you become rich yet? And very quickly I figured, fuck that. And I told him I did. I lied, of course, but it made me feel good. His point, though, for the record, the best I could tell, was that there is no money unless you become so good at whatever it is that you're doing that you can command to be paid for it. And really, that's real life. That's not just baseball. That's any business. There we go. The minor side of life. How about it? We're just getting started. Anyway, let me tell you how I wound up in Vegas. So we'll rewind a little bit. Seriously, all I wanted to do was be an announcer growing up, a broadcaster. And maybe that's why we're doing this here now. But when I was 8 years old, the Rangers won the Stanley Cup. And to this day, I remember all the calls from John Davidson's old baby and Sam Rosen's last call of the game. There was 1.3 seconds or 1.7 seconds to go. Craig McTavish's last face-off. There it is. The waiting is over. The whole deal between Sam Rosen and John Davidson, Howie Rose. I could vividly remember all those calls and how they made those moments all the more special. Really providing the soundtrack to times that you just don't forget, especially as a sports fan or really a fan of anything. They're providing the soundtrack. And think about a team of yours that's won a championship. I bet you could do the same thing. And for me, those are incredible moments. And while I didn't exactly realize it at the time, I guess I wanted to help others feel that same way. So I wanted to be an announcer. And I went to school at Emerson College in Boston, which was a lot of fun. And I got my degree in broadcast journalism. Maybe we can get into more of that some other time. But really, for now, all you need to know is that I had my damn degree in what I thought was the exact damn degree you needed to be a damn broadcaster. I graduated and went to that PBEO Job Fair in Vegas. And goddamn, everybody else there wanted to be a fucking announcer. Wouldn't you know it? Of course, having been there now, it's pretty obvious, and anyone that's hired for that position knows that it's probably one of the worst positions you could wind up having to hire for. But I didn't know that at the time, and I feel like we could probably do a whole show on the job fair and the winter meetings in general, and maybe we will as we get a little closer to them this winter. But if you've never been to the job fair or attended as a job seeker, we'll give you some color in this episode. Basically, the Sunday before the winter meetings actually start, more or less, is a welcome to the job fair presentation. They have speakers come up and they tell you the process for applying for all the jobs, how to apply for the jobs. Someone from a front office somewhere will give you some perspective on what it's like, not only to go through this job fair process, but to work in the industry. And then, of course, Pat O'Connor is introduced, and then we get the "We're not here to make you rich." And that's pretty much that first event. The next morning, that's the big morning. The job posting room opens. And at the time, the job posting room and all the rooms really, they were just partitioned off sections of one of the big ballrooms and one of these giant hotels that the baseball winter meetings take place in. And this was in Vegas. And I remember the minor league, the minor league side, they were in two separate hotels that year, and we were in the Hilton. And I remember it seemed like that's where all the hotel workers retired to work at the Hilton. But that was more of a sidebar. The job posting room had 4 or 5 long walls, sort of bulletin boards, and that's where the teams looking to hire for the specific jobs posted those job listings. Mostly entry-level sales roles and internships, of course, at these job fairs. And the team can display their listing on these, I guess they're just rolling corkboards. So once the room opens, you have like 500, 600 or so job seekers, myself included, all with suits and name tags and backpacks or briefcases. That's the job seeker. And we know this. Suits, name tags, backpacks or briefcases. And then as soon as the room opens, they start barreling into the now way too small area where these jobs are posted, writing down the job number, the team, the position, and then you hustle over to the workroom where you could put all these details on your resumes and hopefully a cover letter, and then drop it off at a bin that corresponds with that job number. So that's kind of the operations of the job fair. In my case, of course, I had a laptop with my outstanding inning or two of play-by-play and some video packages I had produced or edited from college. Also outstanding material. But honestly, right now, I'm not sure if I didn't bring any CDs or DVDs. I'd like to think I brought some. But even if I did, it just wasn't enough, because I do remember sitting in that workroom having to burn more DVDs and having to get more envelopes and borrowing a stapler from our friends at the St. Petersburg College of St. Petersburg or something, who helps the minor league baseball facilitate all this. And I'm trying to assemble all these materials in the workroom. So perhaps I wasn't prepared, or at least not prepared enough. And I don't recall what all the jobs were. I'd love to give you that information here. Probably, like I said, mostly sales internships, and any of the ones I was really interested in were most likely just listed as number 2 broadcaster and media relations internships. And I couldn't tell you how many there were, but I guess enough that I ran out of CDs and DVDs like a true idiot. I guess my suit, name tag, and backpack didn't give it away that I just wasn't a true pro at that point. It was the fact that I had to run out of these materials. And that combo, before we move on, that combo at those events are like the equivalent of having training wheels on a bike when you're at the age of 18, or showing up at prom with your mom's like kiss lipstick on your cheeks or something. And of course, all the people from the St. Petersburg College of God knows what, they're always barking at you to make sure you have your name tag on. And I feel bad now going back. I feel bad when I see them, because you just can't win. That look doesn't win. So the idea is you apply for these jobs, and yet in another room is the job interview schedule room. Pretty much similar to the job posting room, except this is where the teams will post who they'd like to interview and a range of times that you, as a job seeker, now a candidate for this position, would sign up for an interview time. Now, when I say I didn't have one interview in the sort of teases leading up to this episode, I didn't have one fucking interview. So for me, this was the room, And I wasn't alone, but this was the room that became the room where we did the whole deal from Rudy, where he's waiting to see if he was going to dress in for the game for Notre Dame, and he keeps walking in and he's scanning through the list of names who's actually going to dress, only to find out that he wasn't listed. Well, it was the same deal, except we didn't have to wait a week and practice and everything. We just went up and down every row and did the same routine at every posting in this little posting room or area. And the truth is, I could make excuses and remind you that this was all taking place at a casino in Vegas. And I could tell you that I did bump into a friend or two from college. And I could tell you I was trying to play my cards right in the casino. And I could tell you all that and make, like I said, excuses. But anyway, just a lot of distractions. I think maybe at the end of the day, at the end of the last day or so, I was just putting my name up on anything. Mascots, grounds crew, concessions. Could you imagine I put down for concessions and couldn't get a call back? Maybe the resume was written in crayon. I don't know. But little did I know at the time, of course, that many of these interviews didn't actually take place at the job fair or even at the winter meetings. When I did get back home to my parents' house on Long Island, I did get a call and have an interview for an internship with the Visalia Rawhide, and I spoke to a gentleman, by the name of Donnie Barnes, and Donnie had been there for a number of years at that point, and I didn't get the job then, but as it turned out, I did get a chance to meet Donnie and interrogate him as to why he didn't hire me when years later he decided to leave Visalia and he took a job in Omaha with the Storm Chasers, and he was working alongside Mark Nasser in 2015 or 16. I was a gentleman about it, so just kidding. I only tore up his clothes while he was showering one day is all. But in all seriousness, Donnie is a good guy. And if you get a chance, a simple Google search will bring up an article that ran in the New York Times about Donnie last year. It was all about him and his own journey, hopefully towards a big league booth one day. And I do know he's done spring training games for the A's as well. But anyway, at this point, I'm back home and I need a job. And I guess the broadcasting deal was not going to happen this year, at least, was the way I looked at it. So for the life of me now, I don't know why at this point I didn't seek any other ways to broadcast games. I thought, I could only do this in minor league baseball. It's the only way. It's my only path. But I guess I was real discouraged by the whole deal. Is the only thing I could think of now when I look back at it. And so I lined up some interviews with media type jobs in not just baseball, but anything. I guess anything. I was able to interview and was almost accepted a position as a general reporter for our local Long Island Herald weekly paper. It was pretty much that or work for this startup company. That my own dad may have had something to do with getting me involved in, let's just say, where it was a sports search engine that would aggregate all of the internet and social media, as I recall. So if you searched whoever, it would LeBron James, let's say, it would present the top tweets about or from LeBron, top YouTube videos, news items, whatever it was, anything about whatever you searched, all on one page at one time. And it seemed okay at the time. And this was 2008, right around, I guess, the beginning of the financial crisis as well, for reference. And either way, I went to work there and I was producing sports content. I chose that more or less because it was going to be sports, where if I was a general reporter, I was going to be sitting in courtrooms and stuff like that. So definitely the sports seemed more attractive to me. So I did that, was producing content with the idea for the company that the content that we were producing would drive traffic back to the website. Say what you will, but I guess that was that. I was there for about 2 years. I got to work with a guy named Ron Reggio, who was hired on, and he wound up basically training about 4 or 5 of us kids really on how to edit and how to produce. And I learned a hell of a lot for the time that I spent with Ron. Ron also used to work at Major League Baseball Productions prior to it becoming MLB Network. And I think today Ron is producing reality TV shows for a number of networks, for a number of production companies who are pretty much contracted by networks to produce this. But we were doing a lot of boxing and MMA shoots among a lot of just varying sports. Only baseball I recall getting to do was we went to Cooperstown one time to cover their annual Father's Day alumni game. And especially at the time, it was unbelievable for me. The whole thing was frustrating at times, though, because we were having a hard time getting off the ground. But as far as the production side of things, it was basically fun while it lasted. But it sort of became clear as we went along that this was just not going to last. And sometimes the writing was on the wall, sometimes it wasn't, but it was an up and down period up until I'd say the end of 2010. And so I took it as an opportunity to once again try this whole baseball idea. So with one foot out the door, I guess I went down to Orlando for the winter meetings in 2010. I'd say I was about 22, 23 at the time, and now at least with these winter meetings, I had been there before. I knew what to expect, and I was really fully prepared. Plus, I had some real life experience now. Sometimes, you get out of college and it may sound cliche, but you think you know everything. I certainly did not. I learned the most of what I know as far as production, like the real production stuff. I learned techniques and really how to edit, what to look for once I was out of college. But I guess that's a discussion for another day. Either way, at this point, I did have real experience. So that being said, it turned out, of course, that I was a better candidate in a production role than the 500 candidates for each radio job. So I had interviews for creative services roles, full-time and internships. And the closest I came to a full-time job at this point was it was after the meetings. I had come home and driven out to State College on the campus of Penn State. It was the short season single A affiliate of the Pirates, I believe. I interviewed with Chris Phillips and Jason Dombach, and ultimately I wasn't offered the job, but I maintained my composure. That they, of course, didn't tell me then, though. But basically, I took it that I had the tools to do the job. And if you want the tools to do your job and your team does promotional giveaways, and let's face it, who doesn't, get in touch with Promotional Adventures. And while at this point in my life, in this episode, I wasn't quite ordering promotional items, that would come later when I got to Omaha. And you could bet by then I was working with Dustin and his team at Promotional Adventures. I remember one year we did the Werner Park replica stadium giveaway, and a stadium replica project I really don't wish on anybody, but it's a cool item, and we were doing it for our 5th anniversary of the ballpark. And especially nowadays when every building has all these little nooks and crannies that we needed to include, and Dustin and Cindy were as dedicated as humanly possible to helping us get this thing right from start to finish. From the video board, the new video board that we had at the time, to the Kid Zone inflatables and the big carousel, to where the party porches were, you name it. I was so glad and lucky, really, to have Dustin and Cindy's eyes on this project all along the way. And guess what? You can too. You got giveaway ideas coming up. Get your list to Dustin and Cindy. If you're working with them already, you already know. If not, give them a shot, and don't wait either. With the uncertainty of the tariff issues, it's best to at least reach out earlier than usual and just say, hey, we're at least sort of thinking about maybe doing this. Just to get it on their radar. Not a bad idea to consider. They'll take care of you either way. Again, shoot them an email, Dustin@promotionaladventures.com. Dustin@promotionaladventures.com. And getting back here, at this point, yes, I did feel like I had the tools to do the job, but I hadn't been through a season yet. That's kind of the vibe, the Rocky Mountain vibes, as we talk about Chris Phillips here, that I was getting. And I guess I just didn't do a convincing enough job that I could, because other people have been able to just take that leap. I guess it was that, or they thought I was a dumbass. Jason, I got the feeling, may have thought it was the latter. But I did try to stay in touch with Chris after that, and we did randomly wound up in a big group together, having a couple of beers at this was the AAA All-Star game in Durham, definitely a couple of years later. That was in 2015. But based on the going to the job fair, I had more irons in the fire. And so the best case scenario at the time for me, after an interview, seemed to be to go to Northwest Arkansas for an internship, seasonal deal with the Naturals. And Doug Webb was the gentleman that hired me to do that job. And I showed up there in March. Naturals, of course, are the AA affiliate of the Kansas City Royals. They had moved from Wichita to Springdale, Arkansas, which is about 20 minutes north of Fayetteville and the University of Arkansas, and about 20 minutes south of Walmart's home office in Bentonville. So a big metroplex. Probably at this point, in that area, they have close to 1 million people. So people definitely don't realize the size and scope of things there. But the ballpark at the time was in its fourth year, and the team had just won the Texas League Championship the year before. And this, of course, all seemed very exciting to me. All seemed very like Karen, first being exposed to Jimmy Conway and his friends in Goodfellas. It was all very exciting to me. Trying to give you a break here. But as I looked forward to going there and not only working in baseball, of course, that was the point, but also getting out of New York. And it presented that opportunity and gave me an opportunity to start something on my own. I was living in a house at the time with two of my buddies that I went to high school with. And of course, we'd miss them and the whole scene over there, my family. But there was definitely something alluring, even probably because of my own ignorance, something really intriguing about going to a place where I didn't know anything about. Of course, I knew Walmart was headquartered there. I always loved going to Walmart, for the record, but I didn't know exactly what that meant until I was actually there. Also, just for some background, J.B. Hunt Trucking Company and Tyson Foods is also based there. And so there's a lot of businesses. Those are 3 Fortune 500 companies. And then there's a lot of businesses with offices down there, sort of satellite offices just to get close to Walmart and all their buying power. The Naturals owners, the ownership group is Rich Products, inventors of non-dairy creamers. So if you ever want to buy a baseball team, just got to invent something like non-dairy creamers. But they do non-dairy creamers and a bunch of frozen food lines as well. And they've got an office down there, and wouldn't you know, they sell to Walmart as well. But I packed up my car and I headed down. And to show you how ignorant I was, maybe still am, I don't know. Being ignorant. I figure if I give you a different voice, it'll break it up a little bit. But I'm sure this is entertaining. Maybe I don't have to. Probably I don't have to. So I'll just continue. And I'll tell you, I'll pick it up that I drove down there and I was expecting weather in Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas. I was expecting weather that they get in South Texas, like San Antonio. I got there in the beginning of March. So I figured, well, what much of a winter could there have been? So either way, I didn't even bring a jacket. And yes, it gets cold. It gets 30 degrees in the winter, 40 degrees in the winter. You need a fucking jacket to live in Northwest Arkansas. FYI. But I did show up there in March. And that's obviously, for those who have worked a season and been in the business, we know March is a pretty late in the game to begin things. So I showed up right in the middle of the craziness, getting ready for opening day. And this was the team's 4th season, I believe. So they opened in 8, and I was there in 11. So we're going to do some math, too, here on the minor side. But, of course, I didn't know what the craziness was and really know what to expect walking in. Doug, he was prepared, and he had a lot done. And I do remember, though, he was going with Eric Edelstein, the GM. And we'll talk about Eric, I'm sure, as we go. and I think maybe the broadcaster, Stephen Davis, the three of them, Eric, Doug, and Stephen, were going out to the Royal Spring Training in Surprise, Arizona, obviously where the Royals had their spring training, and that is where they were going to hand out their rings to the team that won the Texas League championship the previous season. So Doug, he pretty much gave me a game rundown with all the elements and was like, here, have at it. And in those couple of days, I wound up creating a lot of the sponsor graphics that we used that year in the span of, maybe less than a week. And so I did feel like I was learning what minor league baseball was and learning pretty fast. And I did get comfortable pretty quickly that year. And I'm not sure if it's still like this anywhere, but as an intern, we worked just as much, if not more, than the full-time staff. But I was having fun, and I was learning so much that I didn't notice and I didn't care. And this is probably music to a lot of people's ears, and I don't mean to get on a soapbox, so to speak, but things have certainly strayed from this point. Any way you slice it, to me, that means that this opportunity that I had would not be available even just a few years later. And that could have meant, even for me, a whole different story for anyone really who had a similar experience like so many people have. And it did work for me in a lot of ways. Not only was I doing something I always wanted to do and had some experience, was able to contribute, but Arkansas was also so affordable too, especially compared to where I was coming from, that it made the whole thing work. During games, I was either operating a camera, eventually running graphics on the video board and directing the in-house feed. When the team was on the road, we were producing graphics, flyers for the group nights, headshots for the teams about to come in, and that was pretty much our summer for the most part. For some reason, this season, I'll always remember being in the third base camera, shooting the game on a sort of run-in-the-mill weekday night. Don't remember what day of the week it was, but there was a guy sitting to my left. He had an English accent, so automatically he was very fancy, but he was seated like one or two seats away, and he was just on his phone having he was having a conversation on the phone, and he was just pretty much in awe at the type of night it was, the experience he was having, and the fact that it was just something like $12 or something that he could sit right where he was sitting. He thought that they were the best seats in the building, and he was just almost laughing about what a great experience he was having for such an affordable price. And I just, for whatever reason, I just remember that. But beyond Austin Powers, though, I guess I was getting my reps in. Working games, getting a feel for the flow and the pace of everything and how an organization works and what the responsibilities of really Doug's position was. And I knew that this is what I wanted to be doing. And pretty late in the season, I don't remember if it was Doug or Eric who let me know that there was an opening for the production job in Midland. The Midland Rockhounds, the AA affiliate for the Oakland A's, way out in West fucking Texas. And if I was interested in this job, which I damn well was, I should get in touch with Monty Hopple, their GM, who I was told was a real nice and down-to-earth guy. So we spoke, Monty and I, and decided that I should fly to Midland, and we split the cost of the flight. And I think he said that if I wound up working there, they just cover the whole thing. Either way, I certainly wouldn't need a jacket for this trip. It was August and it was hot as hell. And Monty met me at the airport, and on the way to the hotel, he was trying to give me a lay of the land in the car. Two main points I remember was that they were in the midst of a months-long drought and were experiencing wildfires as a result of the drought. And the local economy, he was also saying, is basically tied lockstep to the oil business, and at the time they were having success because the oil business was booming. And that's pretty much what I remember about that drive, and of course the scenery of just I don't know if it's a desert in Midland, but it definitely desolate. But we skipped a drive through the downtown-ish area, and we drove over to the hotel, which was basically on the other side of the parking lot from the ballpark. And their ballpark was just a little bit older than our Rest ballpark in Springdale, probably about the same capacity, except there in Midland, the ballpark is in the same complex as a high school football stadium that's literally next door and literally twice the size, the capacity. And of course, it did dawn on me that this is Midland, Odessa. So for you Friday Night Lights people, this was right in the heart of it. And this complex where the ballpark is situated, you basically have baseball stadium, football stadium. Other side of the parking lot on the complete just opposite end is the hotel. And then on one of the other sides is a Japanese restaurant that we'll get to in a bit. They had some sort of indoor hospitality area, which I think also serves as their staff meal. And so I got a bracelet. Monty was kind enough to give me one, and I basically just helped myself to that meal and waiting for the game to start. And then a few minutes later, wouldn't you know it, it started raining, and it rained hard. I wound up tarping the field with whoever else was out there. And they actually, in the midst of this drought, they got, it started pouring, and they called this game. Afterwards, I remember they were like, "You got to stay, you've brought the rain." And we'll talk about it. Maybe was my response. But afterwards, I was introduced to the staff and invited into, I guess, the post-game front office ritual of counting the money. And it just seemed sort of bizarre to me, and I did decline. We did get upstairs eventually, and again, even though the ballpark wasn't that old, the gear upstairs at the time, at least, was not what I was accustomed to in Northwest Arkansas. So it was an interesting night. And then for the straw that was about to break the camel's back. So the parking again is on one side and the other side has the two stadiums on the other side. The only other building that I recall being there was this Japanese restaurant, sushi place, and I was looking for matches or a lighter, and I walked. I didn't have any when I was on the plane. This is when I thought you couldn't bring a lighter on the plane. I've since learned that I think you can. So I'm looking for matches or a lighter, and I walk over to this Japanese place, and it's closed. So then I'm like, all right, I'll walk into the football stadium where it must have been the end of the game because I just walked in, no ticket or nothing, and I guess they waited out the storm or kept playing through it or whatever. And I went in and asked maybe a handful of people in there if they had a lighter or matches. And let's just say they told the mark no. And I got the feeling that this wasn't going to work. So I went back to Northwest Arkansas, finished up the season. We made the playoffs, which bought me another week into September. And keep in mind, I had no job to go back to now. I kept applying for jobs, and all the while, I guess this whole time, I didn't mention I was working / helping a friend who was promoting independent wrestling, indie wrestling. Indie wrestling, in case you don't know, is basically minor league baseball without the financial backing, much less lighting, and in most cases, even more carny than minor league baseball. Again, I told you this was a perfect fit from day one, so there's that marriage. So I did have some money coming in, though, and I was helping to produce his live streaming events and DVDs, and so I figured that it'd be best if I stayed in Northwest Arkansas. That's right. Thought it would be better if I stayed in Northwest Arkansas rather than head back home. The thought process was that I didn't want to lose any momentum that I had created by being out there, and in effect, if I went back home, I would be quote, going back home jobless, a jobless idiot. Not that everyone who's jobless is an idiot, but that was just my thinking. So I thought it would be a step in the wrong direction Plus, it was, like I said, it was affordable. I had some money coming in, and it was just so affordable that it could work at least for a few months. So I gave myself a couple of months before, the axe was going to fall. I was set up with a couple of interviews and really had a lot of what I would say are close misses over this time. And they all helped manage my expectations for the future, really. My Uncle Kenneth, who, if you do a search Clay from the Sons of Anarchy, you'll know exactly what he looks like. But God bless him, my Uncle Kenneth, he introduced me to, get this. This is because everyone's always like, oh, I know this guy. So my Uncle Kenneth, he introduces me to a lawyer named Arnold Burns. And he not only, Arnold Burns, God rest his soul, he's no longer with us, but he not only mentored Randy Levine, who is president of the New York Yankees, but he also represented George Steinbrenner. You may have heard of him during his case for reinstatement back into baseball, and that was in the early 90s. He was banished from baseball. Mr. Burns helped him try to get back in. So just, I don't even know what this was. This was like doing somebody a favor. I felt awkward. But I'm not going to turn the opportunity down. So I went and I visited with Mr. Burns, not from The Simpsons, a different Mr. Burns, who I learned had an even more really a colorful career in law, working for the Justice Department. He was worked in the Reagan administration, and of course he also helped get George Steinbrenner reinstated back into baseball. So looking back, it was a great experience. At the time, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing there. No disrespect intended, but that's just how I felt. Like I said, it was just somewhat awkward. There was no job, but I was just meeting this gentleman. And I did wind up having a conversation with Randy Levine a few weeks later. I remember, again, there was no job we were talking about. So it's like, what do you actually talk about? I'm not sure in these situations, except that I did need a job. Needless to say, this was my introduction to being nice, to be nice and to do favors for people, just to be, I guess, professional and courteous. It was either that or they both obviously thought I was a moron. But I went back to Arkansas now. The weeks now turned into months, and I was getting close to the point that I was going to have to head back home. Again, a jobless idiot. But at least the winter meetings were going to be in Dallas. Dallas is only about a 5-hour drive from Northwest Arkansas, and then shit has happened so many times as it does in the industry. Someone leaves a team and they need to fill a spot, and in this case, there was a job that opened with the Binghamton Mets. At the time, the video guy, for lack of a better word, video guy, his name is John Kofer, and he was leaving for a job with the Devils, I believe. And he had reached out to one of his old interns, who was in Northwest Arkansas, Doug Webb, wouldn't you know? And Doug didn't have too much interest in going back to Binghamton, which I guess in a few months I'd know why, I guess. But of course I didn't care. And Doug was nice enough, at the end of the day, to ask me if I'd be interested. And of course I was. So I reached out to Jim Weed. Jim was the GM in Binghamton at the time. And I'll say this about Jim, and I'm sure his best friends in the business would say the same thing, even though I'm not one of them. I don't feel like I'm talking too much shit here. And he was definitely serious when he needed to be, but goddamn, he reminded me if like Tommy Boy became a minor league GM. I think he had calmed down by the time I was there, which of course was unfortunate. But we had one or two good talks on the phone at this point, and I'd sent my production materials over, and he was like, yeah, it seems, I remember he just kept, it was like, it seems like a good fit. It seems like a good fit. And that was obviously music to my ears. And he says, are you going to be in Dallas? I suppose I mentioned it in our talks that I was, planning to go if nothing had worked out here. And now here he says, this is where he said it was going to be a good fit. So I'm like, oh, it's going to be a good fit. Let's do it. Just put the phone down. I take the job. I got it. And he's like, oh, you'll be in Dallas. Let's meet there. Oh, God damn. So I hung up the phone and like, shit, now I got to go to Dallas. When if it was such a good fit, let's just call it a day right there. Again, I know better. He wasn't an idiot. He wanted to know what I looked like, what I dressed like. So he at least figured, oh, well, let's take the chance and meet in person. But we could also see what else is out there in the job fair. So shrewd bastard. But either way, I went off to, my third winter meetings to obtain a full-time job in the industry. At least here, I knew I was fully qualified now, having not only the technical experience, but having been through a season as well now. And looking back, I had a great time at these meetings because in some ways, I almost felt like I was playing with house money. And now I was turning people down. So, of course, I figured, well, you know what, you want to play the field? I'll go to the winter meetings and play the field as well. So that's kind of what we did. And like I said, I did have a stress-free sort of good time at these meetings, and it did have its memorable highlights, so it was worth it. But just because this is kind of the episode where it would only make sense to get this out here, here's a quick couple. Number one, and this may be my most unbelievable minor league baseball story, but having been through it, it makes perfect sense. I'll preface it by saying that at least I hope the statute of limitations expired. This had to be about 10 years ago, and if there's any ill feelings from anyone involved, let me at least cast some shadow of a doubt at this point. Okay, that was that point. So the story goes is that this is the hotel lobby bar at the winter meetings. This is in Orlando, and of course, it just means it's jam-packed. It's the lobby bar at the winter meetings. And I'm there, probably a couple of beers and maybe a few gin and tonics deep. Honestly, at that point, I don't think I switched over to the gin and tonics yet, so maybe it's Jack and Cokes or something like that. But either way, it's not important. And it's a clean story, too. It's a clean story. So it's not going where it sounds like. But it is getting pretty late. It's past midnight, and I'm having a pretty good time. I'm strolling around, I guess, and I see Brian Cashman, of course, general manager of the New York Yankees. Now, did I go into the whole Randy Levine bit? Absolutely not. And actually, it didn't even cross my mind until now, really. But I'm just giving him a, hey, how are you? And I rarely strike up these sorts of conversations, but for whatever reason, we're chatting it up. And I knew he does this deal every year in Westchester, New York, where he dresses up as Santa. And I remember we were talking about that when I guess I saw at that point why we were still talking at that point. It turns out there were a group of reporters trying to approach him for some hot stove quotes. It's at the winter meetings. And by the way, no 2 reporters or 4 reporters, unless you're having a drink or whatever with the actual person you're going to quote, don't just walk up to somebody who's holding a drink in their hands after midnight and trying to get a quote. It's just not right. And know your boundaries. You know, leave it to the other drunk idiots to have these types of conversations. But that didn't happen then. So anyway, I see he's pretty much using the conversation he's having with me as a shield not to have to talk to these reporters that are now sort of circling around him like hawks or something. So I continue to sort of be the security, I guess. And when they finally break the wall here and just interrupt, they're New York writers after all, and they're sort of peppering him with questions then. And this was the off season of Carl Crawford going to the Red Sox. I think that this was the night because he had signed, I guess, because that's what they were asking him about, Carl Crawford going to the Red Sox. And that's when I interrupted because I'm from New York after all too, I guess. Well, not I guess, I am. Either way, I said, guys, the Yankees don't need Carl Crawford. They have Brett Gardner. It turned out to be right, true. And with that, the group of us now sort of stopped and looked at Cash, and he pointed my way, and he pretty much said, yep, what he said. And then with that, he scurried them off, and I was a hero for the moment, but couldn't leave ahead. I guess it doesn't end there, because at that point, the writers sort of took off, and either he or me was kind of running low on the glass there. So I'm like, oh, let me get you a drink. Let me get you a drink. He's like, no, I can get it. And, whatever, I'm insisting. And the closest bar in the area was like a small little satellite bar, a floating bar, whatever they're called. And I'm already ordering. And he had like a vodka or something. And honestly, I don't remember. And then I get my drink. And then the girl behind the bar, she gives me the bill. So I go to give her my credit card, and she's like, sorry, cash only. So he sees this, and again, he's trying to get the drinks. And, I'm a big shot after all, obviously, without enough cash to cover the order here. So I'm like, no, I got it. Even though I don't know, I obviously didn't have it, but I got it. And then I kind of tell the bartender there that I don't have cash, and she's like, "Oh, just put it on your room." And well, I wasn't staying at the hotel, but I had a feeling that he was. So I said, "Okay, I'll do that." And I wrote down Brian Cashman, and I wrote down some gimmick room number. I said thank you to her, and I gave him his drink, and I was like, "All right, well, see you later." And I guess thank you to Cash or whoever picked up that drink. I don't think there's a lesson in there. I'm not too sure what it is. Probably don't be an idiot or don't be a big shot. I don't know. But at the end of the day, pretty much only at the winter meetings does something like this happen. Otherwise, I did have a bunch of interviews, but beyond meeting with Jim Weed and Brian Cashman for that matter, one of the interviews I had for a job may be even more memorable of the time there. And I hope you know that really sharing it here on the minor side of life with you, yes, you, I hope shows you that, at least with me, I can't speak to all of our guests, but with me, nothing is really off limits. And I'm not ashamed, right or wrong. And I hope that in all seriousness, it does translate to great guests and a great listening experience for you guys. And girls, hopefully. The job posting that I looked at for, we're telling the story now. So the job posting that I had answered was for a production role, said for Salt River Fields. Salt River Fields was a new spring training facility for the Diamondbacks and Rockies. I think it was in its second year, and I eventually did get there. And it was an amazing place if you've never been there. There's probably the class of all spring training facilities, and I'm sorry to Florida spring training does not hold a candle to Arizona. And I'm sorry, a East Coast person, grew up a Mets fan, would want to think that Florida has a better spring training deal than Arizona. It's not even close. Either way, I learned during the interview that this job was just operating the Major League Baseball spring training games for the Rockies and Diamondbacks. So this was 30 or 40 games in, like 30 or 40 days or something like that. And the job was over after spring training. And I learned this on the interview. And I swear I was sitting there thinking at one point that there was a fucking team called the Salt River Fields. And that's who played there. Then I learned all this shit. And I'm pretty sure I didn't make that known to the gentleman doing the interview, but honestly, I don't remember. I may have just been like, oh, so how many games do the Fields play? But I don't know. Either way, it was really wound up where we started. It was old Jim Weed when he told me that I was this good fit and I was playing with the house money. I took the first offer he made, and just like that, I said goodbye to my friends in Northwest Arkansas, stopped at my parents' house for a few days, and then started in Binghamton full-time as their director of video production. My first day was wing night at the Ale House, the beer joint of your dreams. And that's where I met my C, and that's where I learned how to do the production job with no net, so to speak. And really, for now, that's all I have to say about that. I look forward to sharing more. In all seriousness, that's really the background and how I started doing this. And I hope it provided a little more context as who I am, my sort of style, and where I'm coming from. Obviously, I'm here to do a lot. And a lot has happened since then, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about it. And we do so, of course, over at minerside.com right now with an episode that in some ways picks up where this one leaves off. Again, this episode presented by Promotional Adventures is part of a two-part release along with a show where I talked to Connor Gates, who I worked with the Binghamton Mets, as they were known at the time. So I figured it was a decent companion piece here to sort of pick up some of the pieces after I tell you how I got there. You can kind of see what happened next a little bit with Connor. Connor himself's got an interesting story in that he was about 10 years old when that team started up in Binghamton. He worked there almost all of his life, started as a bat boy, and he really put his heart and soul in the community relations and the promotions job that he had there. And then it all ended one day. He's since picked up the pieces himself, and he works with the AHL's Binghamton Devils now. And as they get ready for their upcoming season, we'll talk all about it with him. Also, in the upcoming weeks, we will have episodes with guests that include Anthony Serratelli. He'll be one of the first players who will stop by the minor side, and we'll talk about his playing days in the Royals and Mets systems, indie ball as well, where the Royals had signed him out of, to his season in Japan. He retired a few years ago from the game and started a film and production company that he runs now that's really on fire. So looking forward to talking with him about that. Also on deck is a chat with Brian Radel. Brian is currently with the Philadelphia Wings in the National Lacrosse League, but he spent about 15 years in baseball, marching up the corporate ladder, ultimately being named general manager in Kannapolis. And of course, he brought some very innovative ideas that were highly personal and impactful. The Cam's Clubhouse, he brought that to Kannapolis, so we'll talk to him about that. Other than that, if you liked what you heard here on the minor side, please let us know. We look forward to interacting. The show is on social media at The Minor Side on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. For me, I'm Rob Sternberg on Twitter and in real life, as a matter of fact. But I do sincerely thank you so much for listening. I had a lot of fun in this episode. For the details, though, here's the great Pete Candianis. He's a real nice guy.
This has been a presentation of The Minor Side of Life. We kindly ask for your support of this program by subscribing to the show on your preferred podcast player, joining the newsletter list at minerside.com, and following The Minor Side on social media. Plus, you can always visit theminerside.com for exclusive content and more. Thank you for listening.